Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave.
On behalf of every father and every mother.
Wings for freedom. On behalf of our
Warriors. And paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have an excellent broadcast for you today. First, I'll be presenting the news as I always do. That will be followed by the report from German aid to Ukraine. And next, we'll have a report from Biennale about what's going on with USAID. And finally, Brendan is here to give us an update about what's going on in Kherson. So I'll just go ahead and jump right into the news.
Shouldn't you, sorry Joseph to interrupt, but shouldn't you also promote our social media links on Blue Sky
You're
and
right.
Twitter? And
As soon as I did that, I was like, I should have done that. So please check out Tochnyi.info. That's our website. It's got a lot of great research. You can read all of our articles there. Please like and subscribe. Check out our Blue Sky. Check out our Twitter, as Maurice said. So, thank you, Maurice, for promoting all that stuff. We have a lot of researchers that work on stuff behind the scenes, so check out all their work. Thank you. And now the news.
These are the main headlines as of March 9th, 2025. During the night of March 7th, drones under the control of Ukraine's Defense Ministry's main intelligence directorate were deployed to strike an oil processing facility located in Russia's Leningrad region. Ukrainian disclosed that a coordinated drone offensive targeted the Kyiv Nefteorg plant, which operates within the Kherson district of Leningrad. The incident gained public attention when local online forums began sharing reports of detonations at approximately 6 a.m. The reports indicated that at least one storage container at the site had suffered structural harm. The regional governor also acknowledged the event, confirming that the facility was effective. The plant holds significant strategic value as it is instrumental in refining petroleum products that support Russia's military efforts. Ukrainian drones also carried out strikes on two energy-related sites in Russia's Rostov and Samara regions. In the Rostov region, the governor reported that fires broke out at two separate locations, a facility associated with a pipeline and an industrial site near the village of Soronovka, following the drone activity late Monday. Soronovka hosts a gas compression station that was previously used to transport Russian gas through Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, another operation targeted the Syzran oil refinery in the Samara region. This refinery processes around 9 million metric tons of crude annually, making it a significant structure. The regional governor acknowledged the impact on an industrial site in Syzran, but said there were no reports of harm to personnel. On the evening of March 7th, unmanned aerial vehicles targeted a production site in Bryansk Oblast near Ukraine's northeastern border. The facility in question is responsible for manufacturing food supplies intended for Russian military personnel, according to a report from Militarny. The Russian Telegram news outlet Astra identified the targeted location as the Konservsushprod enterprise in Starodub, a town situated roughly 30 kilometers from the border. The company specializes in producing packaged military rations, including canned meat, fruits, and vegetables. Eyewitnesses in the area reported hearing 6 detonations, after which a fire broke out on the factory premises. Some individuals managed to capture footage of the incident, which Astra later shared. The Bryansk regional governor acknowledged the incident, stating that air defense units had been deployed to intercept drones attributed to Ukraine's forces. Honestly, if they're blowing up Russian MREs, they might be doing the Russian soldiers a favor if you've ever seen the quality of those things, but maybe they're better than nothing. For the first time, Ukrainian forces deployed a Mirage 2005F multi-role fighter jet in an effort to counter a large-scale missile and drone assault from Russia, according to a statement from Ukraine's Air Force Command. The French-made aircraft participated alongside other air assets, including F-16s, in defending against the attack. The Mirage 2005Fs arrived in Ukraine only a month prior as part of a military aid package provided by France. The first group of Ukrainian pilots and aviation specialists completed training on these aircraft at the end of December following a 6-month instruction program. Observers monitoring the program noted that the training was conducted with the goal of quickly integrating the jets into operational use. During the night of March 7th, Russian forces launched a large-scale coordinated strike utilizing missile and drones from air, land, and sea-based platforms. The assault primarily targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure with a particular focus on gas production facilities. Preliminary assessments indicate that Russian forces deployed a total of 261 aerial strike assets, including 67 missiles of various classifications and 194 drones. In response, Ukrainian forces relied not only on fighter aircraft but also ground-based air defense systems, electronic warfare measures, units to intercept and counter the attack. As far as I understand, the president also called an emergency meeting to address the scale of this attack. Ukraine has significantly improved its drone capabilities by refining publicly available artificial intelligence models with real-world combat data. This advancement has drastically increased the accuracy of drone strikes on Russian targets, reportedly improving the likelihood of successful hits by 3 to 4 times, according to a new analysis from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Ukrainian-American scholar Katerina Bondar, a former Kyiv advisor, detailed in the report released on March 6th that integrating autonomous navigation into drones has removed the reliance on constant manual control and stable communication links. As a result, the success rate of engaging targets has risen from an estimated 10 to 20% to nearly 70 to 80%. The AI-driven navigation systems allow drones to maneuver independently during the critical final stretch, ranging from 100 to 1,000 meters before impact. The technological leap follows Russia's previous attempts to develop similar capabilities for Lancet drones, which it seemingly abandoned over a year ago. Reports of Ukraine deploying AI-assisted drones first emerged last fall, signaling a major step forward in military technology. Despite the growing role of AI, Bondar stressed that the notion of fully autonomous, quote, killer robots remains distant. She noted that Ukraine's military has been more willing than Western nations to experiment with any technological advancement that could increase its effectiveness on the battlefield. The effectiveness of Ukraine's AI-driven drone program stems from its tailored approach to data collection and training. Instead of applying a generalized AI model across all combat scenarios, Ukrainian forces refine datasets for specific areas along the front line and different drone types. This is necessary due to widely varying battlefield conditions, ranging from entrenched static warfare of Bakhmut to regions where Russian forces continue to advance with repeated assaults. Another key development is the rapid training process for drone operators. Previously, mastering drone operations required extensive flight hours and practice, but with AI integration, training can now be completed in as little as a day. This shift has dramatically increased the number of capable operators and enhanced overall operational efficiency. To maintain its edge, Ukraine has implemented strong encryption protocols for AI software, making it difficult for adversaries to analyze and replicate. While physical drone designs can be copied relatively quickly, the complex encryption embedded within the onboard AI systems significantly hinders reverse engineering efforts. Initially, there were efforts to develop a large-scale system that could manage every aspect of drone warfare. However, Ukraine's military gradually realized that current AI technology is best suited for smaller and more adaptable models trained on compact datasets. These smaller AI systems are not only more cost-effective, but also quicker to train and update. To streamline operations, Ukraine addressed the fragmentation of software and systems used by its forces. In the early stages, soldiers often had to navigate up to 10 different software platforms simultaneously. To resolve this, the government established a standardized military dataset called Delta, which consolidated data with universal tagging and categorization. Although AI-guided drones currently make up only a small fraction of Ukraine's current drone fleet, about 10,000 out of the nearly 2 million contracted for 2024, their effectiveness has led to ambitious expansion plans. By 2025, the Ukrainian military aims to integrate AI guidance into nearly half of all new drones purchased. Up next, we have economy and aid. Ireland has pledged an additional 100 million euros in assistance to Ukraine with a focus on supplying non-lethal military support. The announcement was reported by the Irish media on March 4th, and the Deputy Prime Minister clarified that the funding would be directed toward equipment and support that does not include lethal weapons. Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin expressed deep concern over the U.S. decision to pause aid and described it as a troubling development. In late February, Zelensky visited Ireland for discussions with Martin before traveling to Washington for meetings with senior U.S. officials. Following their meeting, the Irish Prime Minister reaffirmed Ireland's readiness to contribute peacekeeping forces to Ukraine and also announced that Ireland would provide Kyiv with giraffe radar stations. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced a new round of sanctions against Russia, intensifying economic pressure in response to its continued actions in Ukraine. The announcement was made during the Securing Our Future summit in London, according to the official website of the Canadian Prime Minister. As part of the latest sanctions package, Canada is targeting 10 individuals and 21 entities, including paramilitary groups and their leadership. The move aims to disrupt Russia's use of third-party organizations and foreign connections to sustain its military and political objectives in Ukraine. Trudeau emphasized that Canada remains committed to tightening economic restrictions in coordination with international partners. To date, the country has sanctioned more than 3,000 individuals and entities linked to Russian military efforts. The latest sanctions specify 9 high-ranking figures within post-Wagner paramilitary organizations, a senior Russian military officer linked to these groups, and 9 paramilitary units currently operating in Ukraine and across the Kremlin's African network. 12 affiliated organizations involved in resource extraction within the network have also been sanctioned, further restricting financial channels supporting Russian paramilitary activities. Ukraine has received an initial payment of 752 million euros or $970 million from the United Kingdom as part of a broader G7-backed loan program funded by frozen Russian assets. Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal confirmed the transfer on March 7th and highlighted that the funds would be directed towards bolstering Ukraine's defense capabilities. The UK has committed a total of $2.26 billion to Ukraine throughout the initiative, with the full amount set to be dispersed in 3 equal installments. Shmyhal reiterated Ukraine's long-term objective of securing the complete confiscation of Russian sovereign assets. He expressed confidence that in the future all of the funds would be fully transferred to benefit Ukraine's defense and recovery efforts. The European Commission, alongside the European Investment Bank, has entered into an agreement to provide significant financial support to Ukraine's recovery efforts under the Ukraine Facility Program. This deal allows the EIB to invest 2 billion euros in Ukraine's urgent rebuilding and resilience projects. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Economy, the funds will be directed towards key public sector initiatives aimed at addressing the country's most pressing needs. A substantial portion of the investment will be focused on energy infrastructure, including the reinforcement of power grids, expansion of hydropower and renewable energy capacity, and the improvement of energy efficiency across the nation. In addition to energy investments, the funding will also support the modernization of Ukraine's railways and improvements to urban public transportation. Efforts will also be made to strengthen critical transport links, particularly the EU-Ukraine solidarity lanes and vital border crossings that are central to key export routes. The initiative will also allocate resources for the repair of municipal infrastructure, including the restoration of essential services such as water and heating, as well as public lighting. Educational facilities, including schools, hospitals, and universities, will also benefit from the funds. Ukraine's state-run nuclear energy company, Energoatom, has entered into a long-term commercial partnership with French energy firm Orano, securing uranium enrichment services for the country's nuclear power sector until 2040. The contract was signed in Vienna on March 6th and guarantees Ukraine a dependable and varied supply of enriched uranium, essential for fueling its nuclear reactors. Up next, we have foreign relations. According to CIA Director John Ratcliffe on Wednesday, U.S. President Donald Trump ordered that intelligence cooperation with Ukraine be halted in addition to military aid. According to officials close to the administration, recent decisions from Washington reflect an effort to push Ukraine towards negotiations with Russia, a strategy purportedly pursued by Donald Trump. Officials stated that the U.S. aims to avoid direct involvement in actions that could be perceived as assisting Ukraine in launching attacks. Despite the limitations, officials clarified that intelligence critical for Ukraine's defense operations is still being provided. Additionally, Elon Musk's Starlink satellite internet service, a primary communication system for Ukrainian forces on the battlefield, remains in operation. The U.S. also recently restricted access to commercial satellite imagery services. On March 7th, Maxar Technologies confirmed that Ukrainian users had been temporarily blocked from utilizing their satellite imagery platform due to an administration request. Affected users were instructed to reset their accounts to restore access. The disruption has already affected Ukrainian military operations, as soldiers reported that software integrating satellite imagery for battlefield planning is no longer functional. They stated that the sudden loss of the capability has diminished situational awareness and created additional hurdles for forces in combat zones. Ukraine will be represented at an upcoming high-level meeting with U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia by Andriy Yermak, head of the presidential office, Pavlo Palisa, his deputy, Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha, and Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, as announced by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky confirmed that he will begin the week with a visit to Saudi Arabia, where he is scheduled to meet with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman on Monday. Following the meeting, Ukrainian diplomatic and military representatives will be in Jeddah for discussions with U.S. officials on Tuesday. He emphasized Ukraine's commitment to constructive dialogue, stating that the delegation is fully prepared to engage in discussions aimed at achieving necessary agreements and outlining next steps. Zelensky has consistently pursued peace, adding that Kyiv has presented realistic proposals to end the war. In addition to the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia, Ukrainian and British diplomatic teams convene in Kyiv on March 8th. Zelensky described the discussions as highly productive, noting that both sides explored coordinated steps to accelerate diplomatic efforts and move closer to achieving peace. Belarus and Russia have officially ratified the Union State Security Pact, a move that strengthens their military alignment and expands Russia's current umbrella over Belarus. It signed on December 6th allows Russian nuclear weapons to be deployed against potential threats, even in cases where the adversary does not possess nuclear capabilities. Russian President Vladimir Putin finalized the ratification process on February 28th, following expedited approval by the State Duma earlier in the month. Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko signed the ratification law on March 4th, as confirmed by his press office. The agreement will officially take effect once both sides exchange ratification documents. The security pact coincided with Russia approving a postponement of Belarus's repayment of $800 million in state loans, raising speculation that the debt relief was part of a broader exchange. Opposition figure Pavel Latushka, a former official in the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, argued that Lukashenko is effectively trading national sovereignty for continued financial support from Moscow. One of the most notable provisions of the agreement is Article 5, which paves the way for Russian military bases and troop deployments in Belarus under the pretext of preventing external threats. However, the establishment of permanent bases would require a separate bilateral agreement, something Moscow has been pushing for since at least 2015. The agreement is said to last 10 years, with an automatic renewal clause unless either party formally announces a withdrawal 6 months in advance. Belarus is set to host the Zapad 2025 or West 2025 military exercises in September, with participation expected to reach around 13,000 troops. The upcoming joint drills have raised concerns among Ukrainian officials, as such exercises have historically served as cover for larger military maneuvers. Authorities in 2 regions under Russian control have blocked access to the Telegram messaging app, citing concerns that it could be exploited by adversaries. The decision was reported by the Kremlin-aligned news agency TASS and affects users in Dagestan and the occupied Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. In Dagestan, Yuri Gamzatov, the regional minister of digitalization, defended the move by claiming that Telegram has frequently been utilized by opposition forces. He referenced the Makhachkala airport riots as an instance where the app was used for coordination. Anton Nemkin, a member of the State Duma's Committee for Information Policy, criticized Telegram's content moderation policies, arguing that harmful materials often evade detection and removal. He described the restriction as a necessary step, asserting that the platform was being used to organize civil disturbances. Officials in Dagestan hinted that Telegram may be unblocked in the future, depending on whether concerns regarding its role in facilitating unrest are addressed. And last item this week, the Eagle-S oil tanker, believed to be part of Russia's Shadow Fleet, have been permitted to depart Finnish waters after being held under suspicion of involvement in the damage to undersea Baltic cables. Despite allowing the ship to leave, Finnish authorities confirmed that their criminal investigation remains active. Officials stated that there were no longer sufficient legal grounds to continue detaining the Russian-linked vessel, although inquiries into the incident are ongoing. As part of the probe, 3 out of the 8 crew members remain in Finland, prohibited from leaving the country while the investigation continues. The case began in January when the Swedish Navy discovered an anchor at the site where the Baltic cables were damaged. Finnish investigators suspect that the Eagle-S intentionally dragged its anchor across the seabed for several kilometers, leading to the disruption. Authorities are continuing to examine the evidence to determine the full extent of the vessel's involvement in the incident. And those are the main headlines for this week. We will now move to the next segment.
Yeah, and that would be me. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present this week's most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. First of all, I wanted to inform you that Germany has delivered 2 additional IRIS-T SLS launchers to Ukraine. The delivery was actually originally made public during the last update of the government's website, made by the Press and Information Office on the 17th of February, so I believe 2 weeks ago. However, they the update by merging 2 listed items and also not marking it as a new delivery, so it went unnoticed by me and others. Gladly, the delivery was once again confirmed by Germany's Minister of Defense, Boris Pistorius, during a joint press conference with his Ukrainian counterpart on Thursday. And already last but not least, the latest Politbarometer survey by ZDF dropped on Friday and shows a strong shift in favor of more arms deliveries to Ukraine after the latest decisions made by the US government. 48% of Germans surveyed, so about every second, are in favor of Europe increasing its military assistance to Ukraine compared to 38%, so 10% more now, in October 2024. A further 27% believe that we should continue as before, so do basically just we do right now, while only 21% are in favor of reducing military aid. I think that's great statistics, at least in my opinion. And yeah, that was my segment. So back to you, Joseph.
Thank you. We will now go to Bionade for an update on the goings-on at USAID.
Leonardo, can you hear us? Ah, yes, network issues. Should we delay Leonardo then and do your?
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, great. Okay, sorry. Yeah, it just right then my network cut out. Okay, all right. Yeah, let's talk about USAID. Let's start with a small rundown of what happened and then about the latest news. Yeah, Luis, you can start. All right. So, USAID has faced unprecedented disruptions in 2025 following a near total freeze on US foreign aid ordered by President Donald Trump on January 20th. The decision halted funding for numerous humanitarian programs worldwide, including in Ukraine, Africa, and Latin America. Just days later, on January 24th, Peter Morocco, head of the Office of Foreign Assistance, directed an immediate pause on new USAID contracts and ongoing projects. This move signaled a shift in US foreign aid policy, leaving many local and international NGOs without critical funding. The situation escalated on February 6th, when USAID underwent massive layoffs, cutting its workforce from over 10,000 employees to just 300. These cuts forced the organization to halt or scale down key programs, including initiatives providing medical aid, food security, and emergency relief. Legal challenges quickly followed. On February 8, U.S. District Judge Carl J. Nichols issued a temporary restraining order to block further layoffs. However, this did not restore operations, as most USAID activities remained frozen. Then, on February 13th, Judge Amir Ali ruled that the Trump administration must temporarily restore funding for the key programs, arguing that suspending congressional-approved aid violated federal law. Despite these rulings, aid funding remained blocked. On February 28, several foreign aid organizations petitioned the U.S. Supreme Court, urging the government to release nearly $2 billion owed for completed humanitarian work. Finally, on March 6th, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in favor of upholding Judge Ali's decision, ordering the Trump administration to resume the payments. While this ruling may allow some USAID operations to restart, many programs remain in limbo. The full extent of USAID's future role in global humanitarian aid is still uncertain as the situation continues to develop. Recent reports have highlighted a dispute between Elon Musk, head of the DOGE department, and the Secretary of State Marco Rubio concerning the future of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. The conflict centers on Musk's aggressive push to dismantle USAID. which he has labeled as a criminal organization and beyond repair, advocating for its shutdown as part of broader government efficiency measures. In early 2025, Musk's team attempted to access classified USAID information without proper clearances, leading to an internal turmoil. Subsequently, USAID's website and social media accounts were taken offline, staff were dismissed, and overseas operations were halted. In response, Secretary Rubio declared himself acting administrator of USAID, asserting the agency's independence and challenging Musk's actions. The tension escalated during a White House meeting where Musk criticized Rubio for insufficient staff reductions at USAID. Rubio reported by highlighting that 1,500 State Department officials had accepted buyouts under President Trump's initiatives. President Trump intervened to de-escalate the situation, emphasizing the need for collaboration among his team. These developments have raised concerns about the impact on global humanitarian aid efforts traditionally supported by USAID, as well as debates over the legality and implications of such abrupt administrative changes. Yeah, that is basically the situation right now. We will see how this continues, if there will be more lawsuits, if the people need to be rehired. Wouldn't be the first time we see this from Mr. Musk, that he kicks people out and then has to rehire them. So we will see how this continues, but that is what we know for now about USAID.
Thank you, Bianade. If anyone in the chat has any questions about any of the segments today, you're welcome to put them in the chat. We'll do our best during the Q&A section to answer any. So up next, I have just like some extra stuff. Not everything makes it into my news segment. I try to give you guys concise stuff that's substantive, but some things are either we should discuss them. So it's like, I don't want to just like gloss over them and read them, or they're just like not like they don't fit in the news right. So I call it extra bits. I've never gotten anyone's consent to call it that, but that's what I call it. Anyway, there's a bunch this week. There's so much this week. This week was the craziest week possibly ever of sorting through information about Ukraine. It was really difficult. So I guess probably for the military people, it's like, that's just Tuesday. But for me, it was tough. So I want to talk about some more general broad stuff first. Let's talk about Europe. Let's talk about security. So Mr. Maurice, let's start with some good news, because the rest of
Do we have one?
Yeah, the debt break, right?
The German stuff, you mean?
Yeah.
Now you're forcing me to talk about non-Ukraine related things.
Well, I think it's Ukraine related.
Yeah, no, it's fine. But we shouldn't forget. So for people who don't know, the very likely future Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, is putting in some action before the new government is formed. And they and their future coalition partner, the SPD, the current party of Olaf Scholz, who runs the government, they've agreed on a few things, and among them is that everything above 1% of GDP will be excluded from the debt break, basically, and which, at least in theory, could mean that Germany could go for a couple of years to 3, 4, 5, even 6 or 7% of GDP in defense spending, if they want to. But it's not done yet. They will have to, pass it through the old Bundestag before the constituent sitting at the end of March. And so there are a few things to do, but it's very, very good news if it actually passes. We will see if it does. Right now, the Greens, and they need the Greens to actually pass it, are very, how do you say, reluctant, Joseph? Not willing. Yeah.
We love the debt break.
Not because of the debt break. They always were in favor of, increasing defense spending to 3.5%, and there's no way to do that with the regular budget. So it's not about the debt break. It's about, the CDU. First of all, the migration stuff they have agreed on. Second of all, that Ukraine, like the whole foreign policy is really not mentioned a lot in these papers that have now been published, or the negotiations they've made public.
Okay, so they have to make like a broader deal, and it's the debt break is part of that deal, and they have to agree to everything first.
Yeah, and climatic change is, in my opinion, more or less completely missing. And with the Greens, it's, you have to have that in. And as far as I understood, they want most of that stuff, or all of it, in the papers, at least some changes, and then they will pass everything in the parliament. But I would wait right now to.
Hey man, go green! You're fighting Russia. Biomethane, solar power, it's all good, man.
You're laughing. You're laughing, but the Greens in Germany are probably the most arm the Bundeswehr.
Yeah, I'm
party
laughing
already.
because I'm jealous because you have an crazy environmentalist militant pro-military group party in your country. It's great. I wish we had that. Our Green
All
Party
thanks
is
to Russia.
like bought and sold by Russia, man. Like there's a picture of Jill Stein like eating dinner with Putin at Valdai.
Yeah. Anyway, we will see. It's very good news. I mean, it sounds like they include Ukraine assistance in that deal. So it could be in about 1 or 2 weeks that the 3 billion euro package will be approved by the government for Ukraine. So that's 3 billion in additional military assistance. We will see. We will see.
Yeah, so I'd say like that's again tentatively good news because it hasn't actually happened yet. But I think it seems to me that the political establishment in Germany is awake to the reality that it needs to happen, and it seems like it's going to happen, and so it's so important. Like that's one of the things that we've been talking about for like a year or longer. I'm sure you've been talking about it for longer, but I know it's been on my mind for like a year of like, if this doesn't happen, it's going to be really difficult for Germany to meaningfully affect what's going on further, I guess. Like they've done a lot, but they couldn't do more than what they've done without this change. So this is a really big deal. It's really good news. I don't know. In a week full of crazy news, just stop and savor this one piece of relatively straightforward good news, everybody. Okay. Next, I hope this is straightforward and good news, but we'll see. Probably not. It's the EU. The EU met and they agreed to an unprecedented $800 billion defense spending increase over 10 years, I believe. Words were said, momentous, changing of an era, all that stuff. My question to you, Maurice, would be, is this like one of those EU things that is like binding, or is it just kind of a recommendation and it doesn't have teeth? Or is it, what is it somewhere in the middle? Like what is it in terms of, is it an enforced mechanism or is it just like a recommendation, I guess?
You're actually asking the wrong person. Honestly, I could say something now, but I haven't really put a lot of thought in this.
I think you're from that place called Europe. Do you have any idea?
As far as I understood it, this is not like a
Yeah.
binding thing yet. Like they said they want to do this, so yeah, let's all do all this. So, but like, I don't think this is something
That
binding
sounds
yet.
like the EU style to me. Of like, hey, everybody, let's pass
I mean-
a strongly worded letter that we should do this. But I don't know. I mean, it was all over the news. I have to imagine that all of those politicians like saying they're going to do it, has to mean slightly something. But I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and look on the domestic front, right? For example, Germany looks pretty serious. Norway looks pretty serious. Don't even have to ask about my pals Denmark and the Netherlands and the Baltics. But other countries, questions. But yeah, so that was another piece of news. This $800 billion thing. Again, probably a non-binding thing, but I think Europeans are definitely taking security more seriously. That's a very clear signal that happened this week. Okay, so there's a lot of crazy news that I had to talk about. So just a quick one. Poland is introducing large-scale military training for all adult males. That was announced by the president. I think it's probably something that a lot of countries bordering Russia should be doing. I know, Finland, I think, does that. It's just, Ukraine has a territorial defense force. They created that shortly before the invasion. A lot of those units were still kind of forming up during the initial invasion of 2022. So, I don't know. I think it's an important move for Poland in general, but it's probably a model that the rest of European countries should probably follow. Up next is there was a Voice of America correspondent who was fired in one of the many Doge purges. That was Ostap Yarush, I think is the name. Yarush, I guess. Yarush. Yeah, Ostap Yarush. He was a reporter who worked at VOA. As far as I know, I couldn't say I'm super familiar with his work, but familiar face to me. Seen him report. As far as I know, he's a good journalist. A lot of Ukrainian soldiers I saw on their social media were pissed that he was getting fired. So it seems like a good journalist. Do you guys have any opinions on Ostap Yarush? You might want to look at the picture, look him up on Twitter. You'll probably recognize him.
No, not from my side.
Anyway, I guess we wish the guy the best of luck. It's a tough gig. There's a few journalists out there, I think, that are really working hard to make the media take what's going on in Ukraine more seriously, and the people who do it, I think, should be praised. So. Good job, buddy. Hope you get a job somewhere else. Keep on doing what you're doing. Next, this is just a fun piece of news. Some things I can't put in the news because I have to be serious. I feel like I have to be serious, but anything fun I save. Bulgarian museum visitors drove a Russian ambassador out of a museum exhibit by shouting "murderer" at him. I didn't really follow the details on it, but. Just fun, just a based moment in Bulgaria. Ukraine has no official confirmation from the U.S. on the possible temporary legal status of 240,000 Ukrainians. So that was a big news item this week. A ton of ink was spilt about the idea that their sort of status is going to be revoked. There was, I think, some media sources leaked this, that it was being considered, but so far no official action has been taken. And that's where I think we're at with a lot of the news cycle now. It's gotten so confusing. When I talk to people who don't follow Ukraine closely, they will say things like, weren't the sanctions on Russia lifted? And it's no, there was a little meeting this week in the U.S. Department of Treasury has a Russia office, and they made a report about lifting the sanctions in the future, basically, and what they should lift to basically get market share back in Russia. That was the wording they used. But again, no, the sanctions haven't been lifted. My point is the media and now the presidential administration just like to make noise and talk about stuff, and then regular people who don't sit there and sift through every single detail and go, aha, that can't be true, they just go, oh, that must have happened already, right? So I don't know. I see a lot of people saying, oh, the sanctions got lifted, or oh, those 240,000 Ukrainians got kicked out. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't worry about it. We should, but officially nothing's happened yet. Anyway, the next item was that an advisor to President Zelensky said that Zelensky isn't going to apologize. That's something that Trump had said. This was Podolyak, who said that. And there was also like a report that Zelensky privately apologized to Trump, but yeah, I don't know. So like there's just, I don't know, like updates on the apology. It doesn't seem like it's happening, or I'll put it this way. There are talks happening not between Trump and Zelensky now, right? There's talks happening between lower level officials. So let's just hope that those go better. Then there was, guys, this all happened this week. And people are messaging me about other stuff. So another thing that happened this week is the Trump administration allegedly, although as far as I can tell, they kind of confirm it here, allegedly started negotiating with opposition figures in the Ukrainian government. Yeah, Timoshenko and Poroshenko. Those are like sort of like, I don't want to say Trump aligned, but like those would be the people that they'd want to talk to, I guess, in a like, those would be the people they would want to be in charge, sort of. And they talked to them, and again, it's been sort of hinted at by the Republicans that Trump wants Zelensky to step down, or Ukraine should switch leaders and have him deal with someone else, basically. So there were these backdoor negotiations with some Ukrainian opposition figures. The thing is, these opposition figures these aren't the people that would win. As far as I understand, it's like President Zelensky has like a broad, like basically ever since Trump started attacking, President Zelensky wasn't super popular. Then the invasion happened from Russia in 2022, and he got more popular. And then Trump attacked him, and he's like super popular now. And then like 20 points behind him is Zelensky, right? That would be like the only other person I would say, arguably, that people would accept. So like these are not the people you would talk to. They know that. They know they're not going to win an election, and they're standing behind Zelensky publicly. So, they basically just, because they know there's no like possibility here, they're kind of doing their best to entertain the Trump administration's like notions, but they're not. They've been pretty supportive of Zelensky, I would say, for opposition politicians. Like, I'd be amazed if politicians in my country behave this way. But anyway, they behaved well, I guess, is what I'm trying to say so far from what I have read. Anyone have any comments so far? I'm just kind of zipping through here.
Yeah, so my only comment to these opposition talks would be that I don't know what Trump honestly expected. I mean, when they are now, let's say the opposition works together with the Trump administration, after all what Trump is doing to Ukraine right now, like, what are they expecting? Who would follow them right now as new leaders of Ukraine in case they would replace Zelensky, right? They know for sure that nobody or most of the people would hate them for what they have done. So kind of a no-brainer, to be honest. And in my opinion, maybe even they know that they can't succeed with these talks, but they want to, split the people of Ukraine. At least that's my, my thoughts on this, my 2 cents.
Yeah, an important point here is Poroshenko is obviously kind of opposition, but like he was a president who criticized, or was a former president who criticized Zelensky the most for like taking money away from the military spending, right? Like he was totally fully against Russia. So yeah, it's not a kind of opposition who's like pro-Russia or against like the war or fighting or anything, right? Like, so kind of stupid to talk to Poroshenko, because he is also very much against Russia, so, and pro military spending. So
yeah, I mean, again, like I do not claim to have any special insight into the Trump administration. I'm just going by what people are saying. But as far as I can tell, like it's real that Trump just doesn't like Zelensky, and he's just like, get rid of him, give me someone else. And so they're just trying to find someone else. I don't know why Zelensky isn't palatable to them, or like this strikes me. I can understand why. I think a lot of times Europeans are like, Trump, he's masterfully dividing the Ukrainians now. But like, I think he's just dumb. I don't know. I think that he just didn't do any research on like what the Ukrainian political map actually looks like. He thinks Zelensky's unpopular, right? Which is like, I will say he comes from a country that told him twice he would never be president, and the polls told him that, and they were wrong. So maybe he just doesn't believe those polls, but like, he doesn't seem to have any actual sense of, he seems to be trying to play a game of like, changing the Ukrainian government, but he doesn't seem to have like the foggiest idea of like how it works or who actually runs things over there. So I don't know. To me, it just comes off as a ham-handed attempt. But yeah, I can understand why it might be viewed as also something that to like divide Ukraine. I just like don't like to give them that much credit, but I can understand why you would. That's a totally valid interpretation. I'll put it that way. Okay, moving on. Ukraine is boosting gas imports due to Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. That was a big topic this week. Part of the target, as I mentioned, there was a huge strike this week. Like 267 objects were flung at Ukraine in one night, and they targeted specifically gas pipelines and infrastructure. And some people are saying like, basically, the Russians are sort of messaging like, oh, remember when the gas used to transit through there and we didn't blow this stuff up, right? Like maybe you should let the gas through again. That's what like some Ukrainians are saying. That's like that's why the Russians are targeting the gas. So I don't know. That was something that a couple of Ukrainian outlets talked about this week. It's a difficult situation for the gas workers who have to deal with the strikes on that stuff. It's dangerous, and best of luck to all the emergency responders who are dealing with attacks on energy infrastructure in Ukraine. That's a whole different kind of war. Okay, and then the next one is Lukashenko. Lukashenko said that he heard everyone talking about rare earth minerals, and he got excited, and he said, we're going to try to dig and find our own rare earth minerals. So he ordered everyone to start digging for rare earth minerals. So I just thought that was funny. I don't know. Maybe he'll find some. We'll see. We'll keep you posted on his rare earth minerals.
Joseph, maybe let's come quickly back to the rearm initiative, because I found all the information. Okay. The initiative from the European Union. So basically it has 5 key components, and the first 2 components explain where the 500 billion come from. The first component is fiscal flexibility. EU member states are permitted to increase defense spending by up to 1.5% of their GDP without breaching the bloc's stringent fiscal rules. The provision could potentially unlock approximately 650 billion over a specified period. So basically, they can increase their defense spending up to 1.5% of their GDP, and even if they go against some rules, this is basically covered and an exception.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. So yeah, okay.
Then joint defense loans. The European Commission proposes borrowing 150 billion from capital markets to lend to member states. These funds are earmarked for collaborative defense projects, including the development of air and missile defense systems, artillery, drones, and advancements. This is the other 150 billion. Then point 3, or component 3, budgetary reallocations. Existing EU funds, such as the cohesion funds designated to reduce regional disparities, may be redirected to support defense and security initiatives. on key factor 4, key component 4 is the European Investment Bank involvement. Adjustments to the European Investment Bank's mandate are under consideration to facilitate financing for defense-related projects, thereby broadening the scope of eligible defense investments. And number 5 is mobilizing private capital. Efforts are underway to harness private European savings, encouraging investments within EU defense sectors to reduce reliance on external markets. Yeah, I'm happy to buy war bonds and European defense bonds if they come out. So yeah, let's see what will come. But I think that's some initiatives, and we will see how this works out. But as we said before, it's basically suggestions and exceptions to rules for the states, for the EU member states, so they can spend more money. And don't
that
break
makes
any
sense, though.
specific EU rules.
Yeah, EU states are subject to a lot of rules about that stuff. So to say oh, we can bend them a little bit, yeah, that makes sense. Another funny thing about that was they said Hungary, what was implied when I was reading about this was it was just made very clear to Hungary, we don't have time for any nonsense. They just got out of the way. They were not a problem this time. So good job, Hungary. Just get out of the way. Let's see. Okay. So thank you, Bionade, for more information about this $800 billion rearm initiative for Europe. Definitely a history-making moment. Europe is pretty much on its own for security. The cops have left the building, it seems. Okay, and then the next one, so I said Lukashenko's digging for rare earth minerals. Next is, so this is kind of my curse now, right? The Trump administration sort of denying everything that is ever said, right? So this week, this has happened 8 separate times. The media comes and says, for example, our sources tell us that Ukraine is no longer being shared military intelligence by the United States. They're stopping. And then the CIA director comes out and says, well, that's partially true, but also partially false. So technically, the CIA director said they are still sharing some intelligence to Ukraine that's defensive, but we don't know what that means, right? And then again, that happened this week with the cyber operations thing. So last week, the media said that the U.S. had ceased cyber operations against Russia in a specific department. So DOD intelligence, basically. So there's still a couple of other, you just have to understand about the U.S. national security apparatus. There's 100 different branches of the government, and they're all different. There's 5 different intelligence agencies. There's military intelligence, and there's FBI is counterintelligence and all that. So anyway, the one of these institutions still is planning offensive cyber operations. So I think they just denied it on that basis. That my point is, the media came and said this, and not only did one media outlet say this, but one media outlet said it and they said their sources said it. And then another media outlet independently checked with their own sources, and they were that's true, that is happening. And then another one did. As far as I know, 4 media outlets did this. So to me, it can't, either they're all making it up and conspiring, which would be crazy, but I don't think so, or something happened and they're reporting it, right? And people are leaking it because they're worried about it, I assume, in the government. So that's kind of the new normal here, is officially the Pentagon's denying it, and or that whatever official insert whatever here, officially they deny it, but the media is saying that something happened, and usually they have some sources, but sometimes the media just runs with things because they're the media and they like clicks, and sometimes they just get things wrong. So I don't know. That's the world we live in now, guys. It's a world where the regular person is weren't the sanctions lifted already? And then I'm just but what does, offensive mean really? Like, what is semantically, what does that mean? Or what is, uh, what is this agreement? Are we talking about the same agreement, right? Like that we were before? Because they're saying, oh, Zelensky needs to sign the mineral agreement. That's something that U.S. officials are still talking about a lot. And they've also mentioned like, well, Trump wants like a better agreement now. So when they say the agreement, do they mean this new agreement that Trump wants, or do they mean the original agreement? And when Zelensky's talking about the agreement, it's very clear he's talking about the original one. So, anyways, you guys get the idea. That's the new world I live in, and welcome to my hell. Thanks. Thanks for listening to my talk. And then my final thing, I'm going to end on some good news, is there is a company in Ukraine. So traditionally, it's not believed that you can repair a Starlink terminal. You sort of have to send it back to, the equivalent of the Apple Store, to the Starlink people. And I assume they have to replace components or whatever. But a company in Ukraine has figured out like how to like pop the hood off those things and actually repair them. And yeah, they said they've done like numerous repairs on them, and people have said it works. So obviously, I don't think they're like certified by Starlink to do it, but just good news that I don't know. I'm not suggesting that they have ended Starlink, and so far, as far as we know, it still continues. But if it ever does, all I'm saying is Ukrainians are very clever engineers, and they might figure some things out. And then lastly, there's just been a lot of alarming rhetoric from the U.S. just in general. I didn't really report on it as news because it's not news, it's just noise, but I think it's worth mentioning just because there's such a pattern of it. So the first that's pretty alarming, this is an actual thing that isn't just rhetoric. The U.S. mentioned that they're suspending military exercises in Europe for the foreseeable future. They'll finish like this year and then they'll stop. So that just seems like a very strong signal of like, yeah, Europe, you're on your own now. Like we're not helping you. So that's a pretty big deal. Then the special envoy to Ukraine, Kellogg, mentioned that like basically this cutting Ukraine off from aid and intelligence and all that, it was like hitting a donkey in the face. Like they're paying attention, something like that. So just like, I don't know, very bad language, I think, to use about a country. And then Trump said like Ukraine's harder to negotiate than Russia, harder to negotiate with than Russia, which should tell you something. Like it's because Russia doesn't care; they're not serious about negotiating. But anyway, and then when there was a really horrible strike on Ukraine, like a hospital was hit and like power plants were hit. Trump said like that's what anyone would do, like what Putin's doing, which is like just insane. Like I don't know, I don't even know how to describe that. And then he did make a random sanction threat against Russia this week. Is sort of like amidst all the like, equivocating and like literally having the Secretary of State calling it an American proxy war. He just randomly was like, and if Russia doesn't listen, I'm going to sanction them too. And then, yeah. And then, JD Vance said peacekeeping, like basically someone floated the idea of like European peacekeepers to him, and the countries Britain and France were mentioned, and he was like, that's what's really going to protect Ukraine is like an agreement that has like countries like the United States invested in their resources, because then Putin's not going to mess with them basically. And then he said like to have two people from some or to have peacekeepers from some random country, like that's not going to do anything. And of course, people in the UK didn't appreciate being called quote some random country, and he got quite a lot of like like hate for that, or I don't know what to call it, like pushback on that. It blew up in his face a little bit, and he basically said like, I wasn't talking about Great Britain or France. Like, what are you talking? Are you kidding? I wasn't talking about them. And people were like, you obviously were. So again, it's just another situation where, it's pretty obvious something's going on and they're just denying it. But anyway, that's pretty much it as far as the rhetoric. Again, I don't like to look at rhetoric. I think that everyone spends too much time on the rhetoric. I like to look at like, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and stuff like that, because that's like real things that are happening. And I think that when you fixate on the noise for too long, it can get toxic, I guess. But it's important, I think, sometimes to figure out what's going on. And there are some pretty clear signals, I think, and the pattern's pretty clear. To me, I think what it says as an American is like there's no longer a view of like these are our partners, right? I think that was the old like language, especially like under the Obama and the Biden administration was like everyone's our partners and blah blah blah. Now it's like you guys are underneath us. Like that's just how it's supposed to be. And you need to like speak to us that way, and you need to like conduct yourself that way. And if you don't do that, we're like the consequences will be like what's happening now. And I don't know. It's really stunning to watch. I don't really know what else to say about it. It's a sea change in American foreign policy. I don't think it is a positive development. I think it will blow up in our face. I don't see how any of this is productive. It doesn't seem to be productive for like having influence on actually ending the war in Ukraine, and it doesn't seem to have a positive impact on like us having allies in the future, right? Like who's going to partner with the United States at this point? So yeah, that's I guess Israel, but that's a whole nother discussion we won't get into. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The U.S. I would say the current foreign policy is very perplexing and doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's very noisy and angry and condescending, I guess would maybe be a good word for it, and imperious. Yeah, so I guess that's my rant, guys. Any other stuff you want to talk about, like with the new? This is a crazy week for the news, so I don't think every week we need to get that deep into it. But man, oh man, so much stuff happened this week. I wanted to make sure that we got it all.
Yeah, I think that's it. And of course, also thank you for the rant.
Oh my god. Okay, rant over. Yep. So thanks everyone for listening to my rant. If you have any questions about my rant, you can ask, and we'll do it in the Q&A. So we'll now move to Brendan, who of course does research on Kherson. He checks all the press updates there and follows a lot of stuff that goes on there. And he just wanted to. He hasn't updated us in a while about what's going on in Kherson, so we wanted to have him stop by and let us know. So Brendan, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, Tochnyi. It's good to be back. It's been a long time, I think maybe since November since I've been on stream. I've been a busy bober, mostly working with Andrew's map. We've had like some record level days in terms of number of markers and notifications, reaching almost like 500 news stories a day in some cases, but usually somewhere around like 300. So it's been busy. So that's why I haven't had so much time to share my stuff on Tochnyi, and I've been working on tracking Kherson in my spare time. So I want to kind of give people an update because I haven't written anything on Tochnyi about this, and it's been almost 5 months now. But since November, I kind of want to give an update on the situation since then. So what we've seen in the last 2 months is like we had before, civilians being targeted specifically by FPV and Mavic drones.
You can throw in another kind of drone with that as well now. Outside of Kherson in the suburbs and smaller villages along the Dnipro, we're also having Molnia fixed wing drones being flown into houses along and positions along the Dnipro. So what we have in Kherson here is pretty horrific. I didn't think these numbers would get to where they are right now, but just since June, we've had almost 2,000 civilian casualties between drones and shelling. Right now, it stands at 1,955 as of the 7th of March. And if I'm correct, I think we had like another dozen civilian casualties yesterday, and today seems like it's pretty bad too from the updates that I've gotten on Telegram. So it's not showing any signs of slowing down. It kind of did for a little while in January, it took a break more or less, hit kind of a lull, but we're starting to see things ramp back up. And we'll get into some data that'll show what's going on, where it's going on, and what's being done about it. Because I also want to talk about some updates on the war on transportation, but also about anti-drone warfare. And then a big question that is actually in the headlines today. It was in an article from the Telegraph by Roland Oliphant about storming the Dnipro. There's talk, and there's been talk for a while, of the Russians trying an amphibious operation across the Dnipro River to try and gain a foothold or a bridgehead on the other side of the Dnipro before any sort of cessation of hostilities, potentially. And I've been looking at that and tracking that since about December 20th, when talk of like 300 boats were emerging. So we can dive into storming the Dnipro, how they might do it, how they've been doing so far, and whether or not that's actually something that's feasible. So getting into the civilian casualties, I want to talk about that first, because I think that's the most important thing here before we do any military analysis, is just understand the lives that are affected here. In January, there were 231 Ukrainian non-combatant casualties alone, and in February, 205. Maurice, could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Appreciate that. So we had 28 civilians killed in January, another 18 killed in February. So early January was really bad. The first week of January, there were almost 70 civilian casualties in 1 week, mostly due to drones. As you can see, drones killed 20 people and wounded 132 in that month alone, whereas miscellaneous shelling, so we're talking about bombing, we're talking about missile strikes, we're talking about mortars, indirect tank fire, artillery shelling of all kinds, we still had 8 people killed and 71 wounded, but it pales in comparison to the amount of people killed and wounded by drones. And it wasn't the case when I was looking at Kherson before, that drones were doing most of the killing. And what I've done in my most recent graph is I've tried to split the shelling and drone casualties out from each other. So you can see the red line is the drone casualties sort of increasing as we get towards sort of more recent months, whereas shelling and drones were competing as sort of the main method of terror and the main method of genocide in this case, throughout October and early November. But it was around December and January that we really started to see things shift completely to drones. There was a marked lull in shelling throughout the sort of early winter months. And as we moved into sort of the later winter months, more recently in February, we've seen drones really kind of come back to life here. So taking a look at drone casualties in total, we have now 1,126 civilian and non-combatant casualties. So when I'm saying non-combatant, I want listeners to understand that's including patrol police officers involved in civilian evacuation operations. And it's also involving anybody who is a victim of remote mining that has been placed by drones. So most of the remote mining little anti-personnel mines, the pedal mines being placed around Kherson. Those are a relatively common method of Russian terror in this case. Specifically, the roads in and out of Kherson are frequently mined, and the villages surrounding Kherson, their main highways, are frequently mined. So a lot of the times you have people that are driving their car and they run over an anti-personnel mine or an anti-vehicle mine, and they're wounded in the process. So that's all included within drone casualties as well. So 1,126. Currently, 90 people have died due to drones just since June. So it's pretty horrific. I didn't think I would see these kinds of numbers when I started tracking back in June. So moving on to the next sort of aspect of this, one of the main tactics that the Russians use is, I call it the war on transportation, but it stems from the rhetoric they use, where they're highlighting attacks on buses as being sort of, they claim, dual purpose, meaning that they claim Ukrainians are using the buses within Kherson mostly for military purposes, and then using them also as civilian transports, and trying to say that justifies the attack somehow. That's not necessarily true, though. One other thing they'll also say is they'll say that bombs are planted on the buses by Ukrainians to make it look like there was a war crime, which is ridiculous. As journalists like Zarina Zabriskie have gone on the ground on the scene and picked up the remnants of drones from such attacks. So we have physical evidence that disproves the sort of the propagandist line that's coming out of the Russian forces here. Gao, could I get the next slide, please? The war on transportation. So I'm not going to read through all of this here, but I wanted to present sort of the volume of what we have. This is all from Andrew's map, geolocated strikes and non-geolocated strikes, and it's not comprehensive. There definitely are more. I would need to do probably a third search through the database to really say that I have everything. But we have 21 of them just through early January, and we've had at least a half dozen more since early January. So we're nearing 30 mass casualty events here, and that's the goal, right? With the war on transportation, it's designed specifically to create mass casualty events among the civilian population. So we see this war on transportation, at least early on, starting to take shape as artillery shelling of bus yards. And we saw that in like June and July of 2024. But it began to ramp up in August with the human safari, as civilians were being hunted on foot or on their bicycles or on their mopeds. We also saw the buses emerging in about late August, early September, as being sort of a prime target. And it kind of comes and goes in waves, right? The Russians aren't always able to catch such targets. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. And just because we don't have video evidence of it doesn't mean that there aren't more examples of it. Not everything gets published, obviously. So we can say safely that there's about 30 of such events, which usually cause some pretty horrific injuries, because it creates sort of a captive environment where the victims have no way to escape or no way to shield themselves, and they're completely surprised by the attack usually. And just this week we had one such attack. Could I get the next slide, please? Thank you. The war on transportation struck again this week on March 2nd. There were 2 people killed and 10 wounded. A 53-year-old woman died on scene. A 61-year-old woman died in the ICU from her injuries, as well as 6 men who were also wounded, ranging from 19 to 72 years old, and 4 women ranging from 58 to 73 years old. So we see, again, it's mainly elderly people who are falling victim to such attacks, right? the attacks have always skewed towards the elderly, and that was something we saw early on, and that's actually what caught my attention towards the human safari at first. I was seeing reports of 87, 88-year-old women being hit by drones, and that was unfathomable to me, and that's what got me investigating it, was the volume of old women being hunted by Russians. So that's exactly what's continuing to happen. So the war on transportation in this case, it was not as successful as past strikes, even though 2 people died. The bus driver heroically drove the bus straight to the hospital whilst under drone fire and shelling, and got the other victims medical care before they passed away, as many of the victims were in a pretty severe state from the reports on the ground. So this could have been a lot worse than it already was, and it's already a horrific event. So, moving on, this is a question that has been sort of lingering for the last 8 to 9 months that we've been paying attention to the human safari, the war on transportation, and the Kherson direction in general. And it also is an applicable question towards drone warfare generally. We need to be talking about what's being done to stop the human safari and what's being done to stop this sort of explosion of drone warfare. So, moving into anti-drone warfare, we started to see in late January statistics published by Kherson Governor Alexander Prokudin, and he's been doing another set of data will come out tomorrow morning, every Monday morning. If you want to check that out yourself, I suggest you go to his Telegram channel or his Facebook, where he uploads the data. And I've actually gathered all this data together, so if people want to look at the data in charts and graphs, I have it all publicly available as a resource in my Tochnyi Weekly articles. My most recent one features this. And so this past week, we saw almost 2,000 attacks. It's actually down about 40 attacks from the week prior. We had 1,991 attacks last week. Not all of them, though, are occurring within Kherson and Antonivka itself. So I've outlined with OpenStreetMap there the Khersonska urban hromada, which is the urban community surrounding Kherson city. It includes Antonivka. It stretches up towards Nadnipransk as well, and Chornobayivka is kind of left out. So it's a administrative district, and Prokudin has used that as sort of a method or a parameter of organizing the data. And it's interesting because most of our casualty reports are coming from inside the urban Hromada, but actually most of the drone attacks are happening outside of it, which I thought that was interesting because with the reports that I get working with Andrew's database, I don't necessarily get the full volume of reports. I just get the reports that result in something, like damage to power grids or civilian casualty or a destroyed car or a building or whatever it might be. So the other drone attacks or the attempted drone attacks that don't necessarily follow through, we don't necessarily see a lot of those on video. We don't get reports about them. So that's why this is really useful data, in my opinion, is because it's giving us a window into that aspect of the human safari and of drone warfare generally that isn't necessarily tracked super well. So just since the 20th of January, we've had 10,562 drone attacks in all of Kherson Rayon, not even all of Kherson Oblast. We're just talking about Kherson Rayon. So those 10,000 attacks, those are including FPVs, those are including Mavic skid drops, right? And we're getting about an average of 1,750 per week. But that is climbing, and we'll take a look at that in a second here. But just to get your bearings, more or less, we're getting more drone attacks in the periphery, less drone attacks inside. And inside the city, they're much less successful typically we're getting like 80 to 75 or 75 to 80% of drones are being intercepted, according to Oleksandr Prokudin. So it's relatively high, but if we take a look at the next set of data, we're going to start to see some more interesting developments here. Next slide, please. Cool. So what we have here are the weekly totals. So the blue line, that is the total of the entirety of Kherson Rayon. So we're nearing about 2,000 here in recent weeks. Compared to late January, we were more around like the 1,300, 1,400 range. So we are seeing sort of a gradual, I think, increase in number of drone attacks overall. One really interesting aspect of this is the orange and red lines down at the bottom of the graph. Those are the drone attacks in Kherson urban Hromada, and the destroyed drones inside Kherson urban Hromada. And what we're seeing is like somewhere around like 85 to 90% of all drones that attack Kherson city itself are being destroyed or intercepted. But we're still having this massive amount of civilian casualties still, right? Which I think implies that it could be much, much worse if we didn't have this new, there haven't been many reports about it, but it just emerged this week actually through Zarina Zabrisky's reporting, a new centralized EW center that monitors constantly the environment around Kherson. And Oleksandr Prokudin has described it as sort of, in Zarina's interview with him, as a wall, or you could even think of it as like an extension of the river, like it's a moat, but it's an electronic warfare moat that helps protect the city. And they're constantly monitoring the environment to pick up what piece of the spectrum is being used by the drones that are interdicting the EW wall. And then they'll adjust their electronic warfare equipment to jam at that frequency. And they have the ability, from what I gather, to sort of target certain areas, switch certain areas on and off, so you're not constantly jamming. I think you're only jamming when you sense something, but I could be wrong about that. I may have misinterpreted that from the interview, but he's described it as Star Wars, and it's a new world-class EW system in his description. And it seems fairly effective based on his statistics, if we're to take his statistics at face value. More concerning, though, is the interception rates outside of Kherson city. So when we're looking at places like Sadova, Mykilska, heading up towards Lvova and Olhivka and Mykolaievka, moving up the river towards Beryaslavsky Rayon, we're getting much more casualty reports now, but that's outside the purview of my data study. So I'm going to start retroactively counting the casualties in Beryaslavsky Rayon to get the northern half of Kherson Oblast to kind of fill in the picture here. Because I think the concentration of EW assets within Kherson city itself is proving very effective, but the inability to concentrate EW within the periphery of Kherson Rayon and Beryaslavsky Rayon by extension is proving to be problematic. So like we had an interception rate around like 60% outside of Kherson itself, whilst we had a interception rate more around 70% other weeks. So there are some weeks where volume, I think, is an issue. So these last few weeks, last 3 weeks, we've seen outside of Kherson Rayon, they haven't, or outside of Kherson urban Hromada, my bad, I'm sorry for mixing up the administrative districts there. We see that they're having trouble dealing with volume of strikes. The interception percentage is driven down, and I think there's like a threshold of about 1,500 strikes on average outside of Khersonska Hromada that the EW and mobile fire groups are able to keep up with the amount of drones. I think that seems to be a threshold, but we'll see what the future data says about that, and Ukrainian capabilities to deal with that volume. So, on to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this is the averages. I did some claimed effectiveness. So this is the rounded number that's given by Oleksandr Prokudin at the beginning of every week. I run the numbers myself and figure out the averages and what the actual effectiveness is. So we can see there are some problem areas to the far right of the chart. 58.79% interception rate outside of Khersonska Hromada 2 weeks ago. So that was relatively a problematic week, where we also have some bright points, which are more along the line of like the average 4 or 5 weeks ago when we had 79%. And the first week of data being released when they were also at 79%. So it really fluctuates outside. And those 2 weeks that had 79% interception were also the 2 weeks with the lowest volume of drone attacks. So I really think volume is the problem here. Which is, I think, a logical conclusion. And let's talk about storming the Dnipro. So, starting around December 20th, reports of 300 boats started to emerge. I think there was articles in pretty much every major publication that would that was able to get an interview with Prokudin. And I know Forbes specifically ran the article where this claim of 300 boats being used to storm the Dnipro emerged, and I was immediately skeptical of whether or not that could actually happen. Could the Russians actually cross the Dnipro in a meaningful way and potentially threaten Kherson city? And it needed some investigating. So what I've been doing for the last couple months is I've been tracking the Southern Joint Task Force command based out of Odessa, and I take their daily or every other day, more or less, reported losses, and I track them by platform. And then also I take their data that is to do with reported assaults. So in 3 directions, they have the purview of command. So they're in charge of defending in the Huliaipolo direction, the Orikhiv direction. Both of those are in Zaporizhia Oblast, so not really important to what I'm looking at. And then they take care of they call it the Pridniprovsky direction, so the cross Dnipro direction. So that's where I've been focusing my data study, is really on the cross Dnipro direction. But we do see how Orikhiv and Huliaipolo also do pull assets away and pull capabilities away from Russian forces along the Dnipro. So we see reduced offensive intensities in the Dnipro direction when we have increased offensive intensities in Orikhiv and Huliaipolo. And you can make that interchangeable with all 3 of those directions. So it really seems the Russian command in that section is not able to carry out offensive efforts in all 3 directions at the same time. And on average, we've been getting about like 1 boat assault, 2 boat assaults a day across the Dnipro, and they are highly unsuccessful. Most of them, from my understanding, are failed assaults if they are able to get infantry out to the islands in the delta of the Dnipro River, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. Then they're picked off one by one by Ukrainian drones. Specifically in November, we saw FPV and large hexacopter, quadcopter drones, so heavy shot, Vampire, Kazan, and can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but large hexacopter and quadcopter bomber drones that are being used at night are very effective in sort of destroying Russian offensive capabilities across the Dnipro. preventing successful landings on the islands. And when there are successful landings on the islands, they are pretty much immediately destroyed, as the island regions don't really offer a lot of cover. It's mostly reeds and brush, and you're easily spotted by thermal Ukrainian Mavics. And so we see basically every time there's an assault, there's basically one boat destroyed. So it lines up in terms of the data. It's more or less being used as a method of punishment. Soldiers in the 70th Motor Rifle Division, soldiers in what I think is the 61st Naval Infantry Brigade, and the 80th Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade are being forced into these assaults against their will, or forced by their commanders to the meat assault. So other things that have happened as well to disrupt Russian offensive potential are deep strikes, not by missiles necessarily, or rockets of any kind, but actually by night bomber drones in some cases, or by reconnaissance assets that are calling in, like a HIMARS strike or something along those lines. So we saw a strike on Zalizny Port in southern Kherson, occupied Kherson Oblast, on March 4th, with artillery reconnaissance being performed by the 14th Unmanned Systems Regiment. And we also saw a 14th Army Corps command post, which is that's the parent Army Corps of the 80th separate Arctic Motor Rifle Brigade of the Russian Northern Fleet. They were hit by a night drone attack by HUR. So GUR got them good, which was great to see. And just to get kind of an idea of the scale of destruction of Russian forces here, we've had 4,235 reported Russian losses in personnel between December 20th and 7th or 1st of March. Sorry, this data only goes up to 1st of March. So that is some caveats there, right? That's 3 directions, but basically you have, every time you have a boat assault, you have 3 to 5 guys, sometimes more, on each boat, and you can kind of do the math from there to kind of see how that might factor into the 4,000 casualties that we have here. So some other really important assets that have been destroyed, I would like to highlight 160 some odd Starlinks have really disrupted Russian offensive capabilities, about 500 artillery systems, and around 1,300 armored, unarmored IMVs, APCs. The Southern Joint Task Force throws them all into one category. So like 1,300 armored vehicles. Really insane amount of assets. And then something we saw more recently, after we saw a spike in assaults across the Dnipro between the 30th of January and the 3rd of February, we saw this massive drone bombing campaign on Russian blindages. So fortifications, command posts, observation posts being reported to be wiped out in record numbers in the last 6 weeks. That has since changed now that the Russians are really focused, I think, on the Orikhiv direction. So they're really trying to kind of undo the small amount of gains that were accrued by Ukrainian forces in the 2023 counteroffensive near Robotyne and Novodanilivka, Novoandrivka, Kamyanska, that area. So that leads me to discuss the geography, and then I am all done. You guys don't have to hear me anymore. Next slide. Last slide, please. Thank you. So where are the Russians going to do it, if they're going to do it? Because we do get the sense that they're still going to try this, even though it does seem rather suicidal. So 3 locations: Antonivka, Sadova, and Kizomis. I've labeled those locations 2, 3, and 4 here, respectively. The picture labeled number 1, that's sort of a bird's eye view of the topography of the Delta, Dnipro Delta Kherson region. And I think it's really important to understand why storming the Dnipro is so hard for the Russians. it is elevation. The change in elevation between the Russian occupied bank and the Ukrainian occupied bank is significant. Sometimes we're talking like 50 to 100 meters in sea level. So difference that is. So that creates some pretty precarious situations for an offensive force. So they've selected some locations where actually low-lying terrain may give them the ability to get a foothold. And I liken it to attacks that we've seen with the Russians where it's the small meat waves, like not like massive I don't know how to describe it, massive waves of infantry, right, being thrown at the front line. It's not like that at all. Rather, it's this piecemeal 1 or 2 boats a day on these very specific locations to try and gain a foothold. And once a foothold is grabbed, then you can exploit by pumping in manpower as much as you need to, right? Can the Russians do that? I don't know. Their boats are pretty much half gone at this point of the 300 that they supposedly had. They have some PTS-2s that we've seen, which are old Soviet amphibious transporters. The problem with those is they're open top. They can carry supposedly 75 infantry, but I would like to see that happen. And they only go 12 kilometers per hour in the water. So that's drone bait, if you ask me. That would be an absolute slaughter. So taking a look at Antonivka, why would you storm there? Well, in image 2, you can see the green terrain, right, is Antonivka. The bank there, it does offer around the bridge a sort of spot for covered landings. And we've actually seen fiber optic drones using the bridge as cover to get into the city and then start to wreak havoc around Antonivka. So you could do the same thing theoretically with boats, and they have been. Not successfully, but they have been doing it. Then looking at Sadova, which is just to the east of Antonivka, Sadova is on a pretty strategic location that was also exploited by the Red Army in 1943 and 44 when they were trying to storm the Dnipro as well. And I based a lot of my analysis off of Russian Red Army plans from 43 and 44 in the past to understand where they're going with this. And I think it tracks for the most part. And Alexander Prokudin, in an interview with the Telegraph today, basically confirmed this as well. Kyiv, I think, is the place where they're going to concentrate their main effort, their largest amount of forces, simply because between Tomanabolka and Belozerka, there's sort of this like 10-kilometer wide, flat, low-lying plain that can be flooded with infantry. And the defenses, if overcome, you're not really going to have much elevation until you get past Belozerka, until you get past Rozliv, into an area where you could potentially start to interdict supply lines into Kherson as well. So if the Russians were able to concentrate their efforts on Kyiv, which they have been trying near Nestriha Ostrov, which is one of the islands nearby, if they can do that, then they might be able to push. And this is like best case scenario for the Russians. I actually don't think this is going to happen, but they might be able to interdict a supply route from Mykolaiv to Kherson, which I think is the goal, that was one of the goals of the Soviet offensive in 1943-44, when in 1944, they stormed the Dnipro, I think it's 80 something years ago next week. So it was around the early second week of March, early part of March is when they did that. So I think, you might see some sort of like historical cosplay potentially in the next couple of weeks with an uptick of cross Dnipro assaults, because we know how the Russians like to play history, like to relive history in some capacity, especially like through that post-Soviet lens, trying to get back to that whole revanchist aspect of it. I think you could see something potentially next week. I don't think it'll be successful, and I don't think it'll be big, but I do think that the Russians are serious about trying something across the Dnipro in 2025. And that's where I'll leave it.
Joseph, are you here? Well, I believe Joseph has a timeout, or is, I don't know, doing dishes or whatever he's doing. He's a busy American. I think we all understand. First of all, thank you, Brendan, for the excellent work and that you actually came back to Tochnyi to do this update for us. I think a lot of people gladly appreciated it. I definitely did. I don't know if someone has questions for that. I will look through the chat if we have. We take the time and say hello to Daniela and Colby. Both joined us for the Q&A. Thank you very much. And Brendan, have you also scrolled by any chance through the chat looking for some questions? I believe I see one.
Is it from just my profile name?
Yeah, is this logic? Yeah, I think that's related to your stuff. So, is this logic behind, or is this the logic behind the attacks? Reallocating electronic warfare or AA equipment, whatever that means, sorry, away from the front line and critical facilities. Do Russians ever learn that breaking all the rules can take away their own protection?
Okay,
Do you have-
reallocating EW or AA equipment. Are we talking about the Ukrainians reallocating EW and AA equipment? Because from my understanding, Kherson, the EW equipment has been largely purchased from the budgets of the small administrative communities, the other hromadas of Kherson Oblast.
Yeah,
So
I
I don't
think
think they've
that's
been
for the
reallocated.
Russians, not for the Ukrainians.
Okay. Russians reallocating EW. So I don't have a grasp on the Russian capacity with EW and Kherson Oblast. I would say seems like it's pretty terrible from all things that I've been able to see. There's roads of death, basically, as we call them, from Holipristan to Oleshki to Krinky. So basically from the Novokakovka Dam all the way down to the Kinburn Spit. If it's within 5 kilometers of the riverbank on the Russian side, then it is getting hit with remote mining. Baba Yaga vampire, vampire's not even a real drone necessarily. It's like a catch-all name now for a bunch of drones, but those Baba Yaga vampire night bomber drones, right? They are the main asset that the Ukrainians are using to sort of disrupt Russian logistics within that area. So tons and tons of Bukhankas, like I said, like 1,300 armored vehicles or unarmored vehicles of various kinds. We're also dealing with like 100 ATVs, a couple hundred motorcycles. So you're seeing attacks on those assets a lot from drones as well. So the Russians, I don't think they're successful in reallocating EW, and they've had a few anti-aircraft assets in the southern direction destroyed. I think less than 10 since December 20th. So I don't know if AA is really doing them any favors there.
Do you mind explaining to me, because I struggled with that? EW, of course, electronic warfare, but what does AA mean?
Anti-aircraft.
Okay. Yeah, now I feel stupid. Makes sense. So there was another question from Nafo for your segment. Is Magyar still helping in this area, taking down drones mainly with electronic warfare? He put out a video about a month ago about saying they were working with territorial defense.
Yes. Yes. Magyar is operational in that area. I think his unit is split up into different directions right now. I might be wrong about that. Tracking Orbat across the different fronts, it's not something I would do. I would defer to people like Geschlittert for that. But I do know this week there were claimed Russian airstrikes on Magyar related personnel under his command in Pridniprovska, which is a small village just outside Antonivka. So that was a claim from the Russians. Whether that was true and they actually hit a Magyar group, I don't really know. You weren't able to do any sort of BDA, battle damage assessment afterwards. The video, it's a typical Russian propaganda clip, right? Drop a bunch of bombs, big explosions, propaganda soundtrack, yay, we killed them. So you don't really get an honest sense of what they were able to accomplish. But I do know Magyar's there, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more question from Kalendan for Bren. What can the AFU do now to prevent Kherson incursion by Russia?
I would say keep doing what they're doing. The strikes further back on training grounds with cluster munitions and night bomber drones seem to be successful in disrupting higher level command of those assets there. And then I would say the concept of the drone line, right, drone linea that they have set up now, where it's this idea of like aerial denial by just saturating the front line with drone assets. I think that's going to be, I think that'll prove pretty effective. I think it is proving effective already within Kherson. It's a death sentence basically for these Russian soldiers that are sent into Oleshki and then put in a boat and sent across the river. So I don't get the sense that the Russians have the actual like real capability of being successful. They might try it, but they might all sleep for a very long time at the bottom of the river.
for a few weeks at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions for you. In case someone, came up with a question later on, just put in the chat as we're moving to Q&A January. Just want to say again, thank you very much for this insight, for the update, and for everything you do. And please come back as soon as possible whenever you want.
Absolutely. Will do. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, so I think I should keep moderating since Joseph is still not here. I hope that's fine for everyone. Never done that before, so please don't go too harsh with me. First of all, before we move to Q&A, Daniela, do you want to present a new article you have written or present anything else, or are you just here for Q&A?
Yeah, I'm here mostly for Q&A. Good evening to everyone. And no, I'm working on an article, but it's not going to be ready soon. So for today, it's just chilling and listening to other people research. And thank you for the amazing research done on Kherson. And I have a couple of questions, honestly, on that, if I can.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
So the first is more silly. Do you think to publish this at any point, a written version of what you presented?
Yes. I have. So yeah, it's kind of hard to do it. So I've been doing a weekly update for this because it requires me to pay attention to so many different things that chunking it up into weeks has been helpful for me to kind of keep track of just what's happening even on the ground in one area. So I do have my Substack that has these articles, but potentially a larger synthesis is due. Given that I'm bringing in, like, I've got 3 or 4 different charts that I'm tracking, or spreadsheets where I'm tracking very different things, but that are all kind of building together. So potentially, that might be a good idea for a Tochnyi article.
Thank you. And of course, if you would like to share the link with the Gao, we can put in the handle right now. And another question is regarding the use of mine. You have said that both side tends to use mines, but which is the scope for the Russian of mining? From what I understood, the more external area of Kherson Oblast.
Yeah, absolutely. I've talked to a couple Ukrainians on the ground there. One of them lived in the small village of Stanislav, it's right across from the Kinburn Spit, right at the very end of Kherson Oblast. And they described the situation in December and January as being pretty terrible in terms of transportation. Trying to get to Mykolaiv to be able to get their groceries and things like that was a struggle. A struggle is underselling it completely, but it was just this terror-inducing experience because you have to drive slow enough to be able to see or try to see the mines, but fast enough to not also be hunted by a FPV drone, of which there are thousands of hunting you on a weekly basis. They've since evacuated from that village because it was simply too bad to stay there. It was too terrible. I mean, and it's transportation of all kinds with the mining. You have police cars being often falling victim to it because, like, outside of Kherson city itself, civilian transportation, I get the sense that it's not super safe, so a lot of people don't do it. So a lot of the people that are out, like, moving from Kherson eastward and northward towards those communities in Beryaslav Rayon, I get the impression that that's a lot of volunteers and a lot of police officers. And I think this week we had 4 police officers who were injured by remote mining. Their police vehicles drove over Russian placed mines while they were evacuating civilians from Beryaslav.
Thank you very much. And just last question: what type of mine they use mostly? Proper anti-vehicle mine or just the petal mine, which are very difficult to see?
I think they're using mostly PFM1s still, the Lepidstock. Maybe some Mon 50 for the bigger stuff, because I've seen some explosions where I know it's too big to be a PFM1, because as brutal as those are, the boom right from the PFM1 is pretty small. It's only a little bit of explosive charge there.
Yeah, I mean, they were designed to injure a soldier rather than killing. So
yeah,
okay,
so I get the impression Mon 50.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem.
Good. When nobody else has a question for Brandon, and Daniel is finished with his investigation, then I think we should move to Q&A. Anybody fine with that? Think so? Yes, good. So we had very early a few questions. I think that was the first question from Kellen. Yeah, here it is. So I think that's actually a question which Daniela or Colby can best answer. How is the intelligence cut impacting Battlefield today? So F-16s, electronic warfare, HIMARS, etc. Anybody? Colby or Daniel? Anyone?
You want to go, or I can go if you wish?
Yeah. I don't know. The short answer is that there's a lot of conflicting reporting on this, so it's hard to really give an accurate characterization of what's happening. I guess I would say that with respect to the intelligence, what I can discern is that there is still some level of intelligence cooperation happening, although it has been certainly curtailed in certain areas. And Ukraine is still able to use everything they've got, essentially. But the curtailment of intelligence cooperation is certainly going to make it a little bit more challenging for them. But Ukraine is a lot more resilient today in what they're able to do on their own than they were initially at the start of the war. So as you know, if you roll back the clock back to the summer of 2022, when HIMARS were first provided, Ukraine needed a lot of support from the United States to be able to use those, and Ukraine's independent targeting capabilities are a lot have been greatly enhanced since then. So if the United States is not helping them conduct strikes within Russian territory, for example, they can work around that essentially. where things get more dicey is when we talk about whether there's going to be a curtailment of sustainment for F-16s. That would be fairly problematic. But it's all very chaotic right now. So I personally wouldn't go out on a limb and make too many conclusions just yet based on the early reporting we have, which is not really clear.
I actually have a question to that before you go on, Daniela. Might be a stupid question, but I never have, or I nowhere have found an answer to this question. So I hope you can provide one to me. So Germany, just like France and Great Britain, together with Norway, have sent their own versions of HIMARS, LRU, Mars 2, and M270 to Ukraine. When I'm sitting in one of the German Mars, for example, or German delivered Mars, like, why can't I use them just like normal, like we would use it in the German army? Because I can't imagine that the German army needs intelligence data from the US to use these systems. So when, for example, some intelligence data would be missing from the US to use HIMARS, why can't, for example, the German army or France, without any big issues, provide these data to Ukraine? To at least to me, as a person without deep knowledge into that, it sounds very easily replaceable.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we really need John on to provide the most precise answer to these questions. But I mean, what I'll say is that the United States does not have the ability to disable any of these systems remotely, which is a narrative that you're seeing a lot of people say. So, for our audience, if you see anybody anywhere saying that, oh, the United States has just turned these things off, that's somebody that you should mute or block on whatever platform you're seeing this said, because this person is an idiot that doesn't know anything about what they're saying, and it is not helpful to spread this bullshit around because it's not true. It's not how any of these systems work. So everything Ukraine has, whether it's HIMARS from the United States or it's these other M270 variants that were provided by other countries, they all still work. And if the United States is not sharing the same intelligence products with Ukraine that they were in the past, again, that can make their life more difficult. But the Ukraine has their own means of acquiring, the targeting coordinates so that they can use these systems. We're not talking about something that proprietary, although again, John could speak at more length when we get into the complexities of the GPS codes and all that. That's beyond my ability to accurately explain to the audience. But in general terms, Ukraine is still able to use these systems, even if it might not be as easy when the United States doesn't want to provide satellite imagery and other targeting data to them so that they can execute strikes on Russian territory.
So, as far as I understood, and I hope that's correct, correct me if I'm wrong, is the only thing impacting Ukraine with these type of systems is the intelligence sharing in the sense of they can still drive around in these weapon systems, they can still use the missiles and the weapon systems. They might have just not the knowledge where to shoot and what to do, basically.
Well, look, again, we're relying on press reports saying that intelligence sharing has stopped in certain areas and maybe not other areas. So everything has to be taken with a grain of salt because we don't know what the full scope of cooperation was and what has been curtailed and what hasn't been curtailed, right? We're relying on media reports, and none of these journalists that are writing these articles really have any understanding of any of these matters at all, right? They obviously have no technical expertise, far less technical expertise than anybody on this panel does. So it's difficult when we're relying on them to explain to us what cooperation has ended and what hasn't. But what I can say definitively is there's no kill switches, and so the systems still operate. And my understanding is that the scope of cooperation that has stopped is nothing that currently will preclude Ukraine from using those systems. Maybe there will be other steps taken that could further impact Ukraine's ability to use those systems. But right now, that's not the case, based on my understanding, based on the conversations that John and I have had with our Ukrainian counterparts, and based on our understanding of how these systems actually work. But again, like, none of us have a full picture of exactly what's going on the battlefield. And I should also mention that it's important to remember that prior to the current administration, there were a lot of limitations on the intelligence products that the Biden administration was willing to provide to Ukraine as well. So there may be less of a change here than people think there is, especially when we talk about strikes on Russia. The Biden administration was largely not providing any assistance to Ukraine to execute those strikes. Obviously, they were strongly against those strikes happening. So it's kind of fuzzy exactly what has been curtailed and what hasn't been curtailed.
Okay, thank you very much. Daniela, do you have anything to say to that?
No, I think Colby covered this question very much in detail. I agree mostly. I mean, at the moment, this is for sure. No, I don't want to speculate without proper information. One thing that we can say is that for sure the absence of access to intelligence can not impede, but it can render an attack, for example, on an airfield or a command post, much less effective, because you don't have potentially the same amount of information, and also the timing that US intelligence allowed so far. So that's potentially can harm this type of event, but of course it's very difficult to judge on the basis of what's going on. For sure, for example, another things that it may impact is also the possibility to know if there is some particular movement in particular airfield, and so try to alert before the bombers or particular fighter take off. But again, this is not only satellite, it's also radar, and on that, not only US operate this type of system, so it may be less bad than what it looks.
Okay, and thank you very much. Moving on to the next question from Greg C. Do you think that Western nations that are traditional allies of the US are now considering them a potential security risk? Before someone else answers, I can at least say from my perspective that these questions are now getting asked by the media, by the press. As far as I can tell from German officials and the boss of the German intelligence service BND, for example, had to answer this question a couple of days ago in a news interview. And as far as I can see and tell, everyone is saying, no, we are still relying on US intelligence. We are still sharing our intelligence without the US. There are no doubts or anything. But I don't think that they actually would say something else if it would actually be the case. I think they are asking themselves the same questions. It's just that they are not saying anything to the public, which I personally can understand. At least that's my perspective. I don't know, Brandon or Daniela, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think the response that has been given, at least in UK, has been probably in UK is a bit different, because UK is playing this role of the bridge between Europe and the US. But in the end, every country in Europe knows that things can get wrong, and not because US becomes an enemy. At least this is not what anyone would like to see, but potentially get in a very harsh debate with Trump, and its administration. Because one of the issues that, from what I understood, is that Trump is a person that very much tends to go personally against leaders, and so the last thing that European leaders want to do is to try escalate any other further conflict with the president of the United States. So for this reason, I think everyone has been firm, frank, but also try to be friendly and show the fact that we have been a reliable allied. So I think more or less, yes, I agree. So that it's a very difficult question, honest.
Yeah. Anyone else to add to that? Kobe, maybe Brendan?
I can say, as an American, I don't consider my traditional allies to be adversaries. I hope they don't consider us adversaries, but I can understand why they do. Beyond that, I don't know if I have an informed enough opinion to be able to go on beyond that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Kobe doesn't want to add to that. Understandable.
I mean, I can if people want to. So I would say that there's two different questions here. Really, there's like public sentiment, and then there's sort of like elite government industry sentiment, and those are two very different things. So I can say this having had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people last week at the U.S. Air Force Association conference, getting perspectives from industry and international customers on this question. And I would just basically tell people that, even with there's this disparity in, public opinion and government. And even then, you have a disparity between what people are willing to say publicly on social media, or on camera, and then what is getting said behind closed doors, right? So politicians who might have very excessive rhetoric on anything, not even just on this topic, but politicians will say one thing, for public consumption, and then behind closed doors, when you go into negotiation, something else is getting said. So I would make that point that although certainly, just speaking for Canada, there is a lot of concern about our relationship with the United States being expressed both by the public at large and by politicians as well. But there's something else entirely that's going on behind the scenes, behind closed doors. And again, I can say that as far as like the Canadian military is concerned, they don't see any change thus far in the level of cooperation that they have with the United States. Really, that hasn't happened yet. Maybe it happens in the future, but so far that's still an extremely close relationship, and they are not doing anything really differently than they have been historically. So that would be my submission to that question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just for clarification, I just don't want to, push you to answer any questions you might not want to answer, right? That's why I say it's understandable if you don't want to add anything to that.
No, I appreciate that, and I think typically I don't have a problem answering most questions, but I appreciate that, and if I can't or don't want to comment on something, then I'll definitely not comment on it.
Okay, very much. Moving on to the next question from Kellen. Any insight into the Patriot interceptors and AFU reserves? I heard news that the SAM-T isn't effective against ballistics, according to the Wall Street Journal. I can at least say to that I've also read that, and John actually
Exactly.
mentioned some, or at least retweeted someone who talked about that article, and he said to us and also on Twitter that he has spoken to Ukrainian and French air defense personnel about these things, about SAM-T and the S-30 missiles, and in his opinion, or to his understanding, it's completely false. or at least it's false as it's written, and that SAM-T and the Aster-30 missiles have performed well against ballistic threats, at least to his understanding. I personally can't talk to that. I hope John is right with that. I think when he spoke to Ukrainian and French personnel, then he knows what he's talking about, and I believe what he's saying. And I can't add anything more to that.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. Just on the question of Patriot interceptors, I mean, these are going to run out. I can't and wouldn't put a date on it, even if I could. But obviously, this is a finite supply, and if the United States is not going to supply more, then it becomes very challenging because other countries that operate Patriot don't have super large inventories, and a lot of them have already made donations. Obviously, Germany has donated quite a lot of its Patriot missiles to Ukraine, and they're in the process of trying to get those replenished. So this is something that once those run out, that's going to be a very significant problem for Ukraine because they're not going to have any reliable means to defend against Russian ballistic missiles, because S-300 interceptors are also practically exhausted. If it's not zero, it's pretty close to zero right now, and there's not really many particularly good ways, if any ways, really for them to get resupplied on any relevant in any relevant quantity. So there's that. On the question of SAM-T, yes, as John said, SAM-T has performed as you would expect it to against ballistic missiles, perhaps even better than was expected, because while Aster-30 is a fine ABM interceptor, SAM-T is severely limited by its fire control or tracking radar, engagement radar. The Arabelle 90 radar is not very powerful. So SAM-T does not have a very good defended footprint for that reason, a lot less than PAC-3 MSE does, but still has been effective from what we are able to gather. That said, there is not a whole lot of information that has come out about SAM-T, very little compared to Patriot. Obviously, there's a lot more Patriot batteries in Ukraine than there are SAM-T, so there's a bigger sample size. But it is interesting that the Ukrainians themselves have not released much information about SAM-T. And certainly the French government and French industry has provided very little information about SAM-T as well. They don't really talk about it so much. And then they wonder why they don't have very good sales for their system. It's just something that they really don't seem to understand, is that you actually have to advertise your products if you want to sell them. So that's what we can say about SAM-T. Based on the limited information, it has performed. It is capable of intercepting ballistic targets, but the supply of Aster missiles, Aster-30, is even less than Patriot, because just very few of these missiles are produced. There were not a whole lot of them to begin with, compared to Patriot, with very, very significant stocks of Patriot interceptors and U.S. Army inventory and a lot of international customers. Whereas France and Italy did not have a whole lot of missiles to begin with, and they're just not produced at a very significant rate. So the overall supply of air defense interceptors has always been a challenge for Ukraine. It continues to be a challenge. It's particularly acute, obviously, for the ABM capable interceptors, because that's a much smaller subset, whereas when it comes to just intercepting cruise missiles, there's a lot more options available to shoot those down. AMRAAM, AIM-9X, IRIS-T, even MANPADS in some cases. So it's challenging, and it's going to continue to get worse on the current trajectory unless something changes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to add for Patriot, as Kobe already said, their supplies or their deliveries happened from European nations to to Ukraine. I'm not sure about the number of missiles delivered by the Netherlands. They have definitely delivered missiles. We know that Spain delivered a very low double-digit number of missiles to Ukraine. I think from European nations, Germany has so far delivered the absolute most missiles. I think we're something around 320 missiles so far, which is quite a lot of our inventory, to be honest. And apart from the Netherlands and the one, was it Romanian Patriot battery, or was it
Romanian.
Romanian, right? Was that delivered already, or do we know?
I think it was, but don't quote me.
Okay, yeah. So, but apart from that, no one was willing, right? We remember the Dutch attempt to assemble a full fire unit for Ukraine, and basically everyone was like, "No, we're not giving away any Patriot components to Ukraine." Right. So I wouldn't count on Europe, to be honest, to provide from our own stocks missiles to Ukraine. Not even full fire units, but not even missiles. Because there were opportunities in the past 2 years to supply to the delivered fire units to Ukraine. And besides Spain, the Netherlands, and Germany, nobody was willing to do anything. So yeah, I don't think we have clarity on that, Kobe, but I hope that FMS and other schemes are available, that we can actually buy from US stocks, or contract US contractors to supply to Ukraine. I hope that's the case. Otherwise, I don't see a future for Patriot in Ukrainian service, at least from my perspective. Yeah, good. When nobody has anything to add to that, moving on to the next question from just my profile name, actually a question to me. At Gao, when the military budget is excluded from the debt break above 1% of GDP, it should free up some money in the budget for, I hope, Ukraine aid, in parentheses. German defense spending was greater than 1% so far. So the thing with that is, at least this comes the first thing to my mind. That's correct. The thing in Germany is we have two different budgets for that, right? We have the Einzelplan 14, which is the budget for the German Ministry of Defense, where everything greater than 1% of GDP would be excluded from the debt break. And then we have the Einzelplan 60, which is the Ertüchtigungshaushalt, so the Ertüchtigungsinitiative with which we are financing Ukraine assistance. So I'm not sure if that 1% excluding from the debt break actually is related to the Ukraine assistance at all. I know they want to, or at least try to, bind the 3 billion euro package for Ukraine to that amendment to the basic law, which they want to pass this week or next week or the week after that. But I'm not sure if that's really like connected on a law level or on a budgetarian level. But don't quote me; it's not my expertise. Right, I just know that the Einzelplan 60, the Ertüchtigungsinitiative, which we are financing military assistance to Ukraine, is separate from the Einzelplan 14, from the Ministry of Defense's budget. So just to add to that. But I hope that actually we can provide more assistance to Ukraine. I think that goes without a second question, but I'm not sure if that's related. So let's check let me check for further questions. When anybody sees some questions for us, just pull them out. There were a lot of text this week. Here we have one. At Tochnyi, regarding air defense, which missiles could Europe produce domestically? Is only Patriot problematic? Could Patriot missiles be produced? License issue? or does Europe lack the know-how? I think Colby might be the best one to answer to that. Maybe Daniela.
I can jump in on this, and then Kobe can also let me know if I'm saying something wrong. So I think one of the issues that we have at the moment is that, and this is, I think, related also to the Rearm Europe plan. 80% of the total business or budget for defense that Europe has spent at the moment has went outside Europe. Now, in this 150 billion loan and 800 billion, which I think is more a leverage on the different debt break, and so it's not exactly money put immediately. It's more like trying to give more flexibility to the member state. They want to reverse this, and they want to acquire capabilities in Europe. So this would be an opportunity. This thing about producing Patriot under license, which anyway need to be agreed with US and with the manufacturer. So it's not like something that is that easy to acquire. It's not going to be probably a viable solution for Europe problem, because Europe now would like to have domestic and independent solution to different threat, and ballistic missile is one of these. So it's much more likely that there will be more companies and more investment in producing SAM-T, and for example SAM-T NG, which is a modified version, in particular the launcher, sorry, the missile, and also I think the radar has been upgraded. So there is more money invested in systems that are developed and built in Europe or European Union, rather than producing things on license in Europe, because these are not going to give European Union and Europe in general that know-how that you need to be really independent and resilient. And this is something that in UK has been happening in the last 6 years so far. At each strategic defense review, one of the key points was trying to become more resilient. And resilience is given to you by the possibility to not only operate a system in an independent way, but also to service it and to produce it, at least most of it, or at the very least those systems that are strategic for the country. So for this reason, I think that Patriot under license now, right now, maybe a year or 2 years ago, that would be a good idea. But now it's not going to be even considered, because if Europe start to emit bond and do debt for defense, which is probably what is going to happen, they need to do investment in Europe rather than outside, because it would not make sense to make debt to buy weapon outside Europe without producing wealth and growth and innovation in Europe itself. Yeah, I know. Thank you, Del. Gao, if you want to jump in with that, I know that, but I don't think this will be something that will become dominant regarding the production in Germany.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that we actually
Because
already have the.
I mean, this is one of these situations where things happen at certain speed, which is not very fast, and then political tsunami happen and change the cards. I would not be surprised if that plan change as well.
Do you think that the Trump administration will cancel?
No, I don't think it is going to cancel. It's not. I don't think it's going to be Trump to cancel that. I think it could be easily a political decision. And remember, political decisions are not always in the immediate future logical. And if Trump can take an illogical decision, you can as well. And this is my speculation, by the way. But from what I understood from the press conference with Ursula von der Leyen, there is a very small appetite in spending on foreign system, and this doesn't cut off, for example, UK. She said that she's open to work with other European, but not European Union members, like the very friendly British, she said, because of course she recognized that there are countries that have know-how that is not present in EU, but still in Europe, and probably Turkey, maybe even one of these potentially, with Repcon and many other companies.
Okay, thank you very much. Kobe, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so just to more comprehensively address the crux of the question, which is like what can actually be produced. Obviously, Germany is producing IRIS-T missiles, both the regular IRIS-T missile and the surface-launched IRIS-T missile, and deal continues to work on developing an extended range missile, but that's still quite a ways away. France has Aster series of missiles, but again, not produced at super large quantities. And the French and Italian governments just won't even provide any concrete numbers. But we know it's not very significant quantities right now. They're ramping up, but again, ramping up from small numbers. There's a number of different other shorter range surface-to-air interceptors that are being produced in different places. But as far as the more capable medium or long-range systems, there's not a lot there. As you mentioned, Comlog in Germany, which is a joint venture between Raytheon and MBDA Germany, is on contract for 1,000 PAC-2 GEM-T missiles, but that production line does not exist yet. It's still being stood up. They're still building out the supply chain within Europe to be able to produce those missiles. So that's still a couple of years away from deliveries of those starting. The supply chain for PAC-2, PAC-3 already includes Europe. So Raytheon and Lockheed Martin have suppliers in Europe for different components, but as far as final assembly is concerned, that's only the United States and Japan right now. There's no other countries that are actively producing any of those Patriot interceptors yet until the new line in Germany is established. There's probably opportunities for other missiles to be produced in Europe, but again, it's just a question of money. Will governments be willing to invest money, both in making substantial orders, and there's may need to be some direct investments as well into helping stand up production capacity and supply chains as well, on top of making orders as well, if they actually want to do that on a relevant time frame. And obviously, to date, over 3 years, that is not really something that European governments have been interested in. Again, with the exception of those 1,000 Patriot missiles, which is a reasonable order that has allowed them to stand up that second production line for PAC-2 GEM-T. But beyond that, we've seen very little in the way of serious investments from any government in Europe to really expand missile production. Obviously, the UK just made a very substantial commitment of short-range multi-role missiles that can be used in different configurations. It's with a lightweight multi-role missile, I think is what it's called. They ordered like 4,000 or 5,000 of those from Thales UK or Thales Northern Ireland. So that's the sort of thing that we really needed to see at the beginning of the war. It's very unfortunate that it's only happening now 3 years in. So Europe certainly has the capacity to produce missiles, but the money has to be there. And when we talk, depending on the type of missile, like if we're talking about cruise missiles, for example, basically Safran in France is really one of the only sources of the requisite engines to produce cruise missiles in the continent. So there's not a very robust industrial base, because again, governments have just not spent any money to build out those capacities. So in the short term, there's very little options here that can be used to get missiles quickly. So to Gow's earlier point, if Ukraine is going to be kept supplied with air defenses, it's going to be very imperative for European countries to just buy those missiles from the United States, which is something that continues to be on the table right now. Again, policies can change, but so far that option continues to be available and is actively being exercised by different countries in Europe. And we're going to have to see a lot more of that in order to make sure that Ukraine still has air defenses, because there's just simply not any alternative. There's only a couple SAMP-T systems in France or in Ukraine. And again, there's not a whole lot of capacity to keep those adequately supplied. So if all of Ukraine's Patriots just run out of ammunition, then Ukraine is going to be in deep trouble. So that just has to be prevented at all costs.
Thank you very much. Couldn't agree more. So moving on to the next topic would be a question from Bradford Cat. Broadcast Cat. At Tochnyi, should be looking for non-Western peacekeepers. So, for example, Australia, Japan, Turkey, or maybe even South Korea. And before I let you, Daniele or Colby, answer that question, I think we can already rule out South Korea, since they are not even providing military assistance on an officially bilateral level, right? So I doubt that they would put peacekeepers on the front line to guard Ukraine. But I will let you answer to that now.
Yeah, regarding Turkey, Turkey, I think a few days ago announced that they were wishing to collaborate in a peacekeeping mission. At least this is what they said. For other countries, the main issue is that they should commit men, as, for example, any other peacekeeping mission that has been created in the last 20, 30 years. But the problem that I have with the peacekeeping missions is that you should have peace, because at the moment the environment that we see from the news is that there is a front line which barely moved, where two armies are fighting each other. And of course, people say, okay, peacekeeping mission, peace will come after a negotiation. But in my deep opinion, I think that for how Russia is posing itself to the West, to US, and to Ukraine, I don't think Russia is interested in any type of peace, but rather than a break from the current offensive that they've started in 2022. And this because, as we have covered many times, and many other OSINT and also professional analysts have very clearly detailed, Russia is not doing well. Economically, is fully committed to the war, much more than Europe, that's for sure, but not less than Ukraine, which is on war foot since day one. So they have their economy very much linked with the capacity of producing weapon, procuring weapon, and essentially waging war. So even if they stop tomorrow, it's very difficult for a country like Russia to go back to normal business, especially because it's very unlikely that it will be very quick for them to re-enter into the European market for energy and other. Maybe yes, maybe not, but it's very unlikely, especially because the pipeline is not there. So there are friction with anyway Ukraine. So it would be very difficult for them to have a reliable economy. And then there are also problem with the fact that you have a mass of soldiers that have been paid also very well until that point, and then they are just essentially unemployed. So politically, this would be very difficult for Putin to be sold as a victory. So he knows that he has to carry on. So I don't think talking about peacekeeping at this point is very wise. I know that the UK and France have pointed out this possibility, so they committed troops on the ground. For even Norway have done this, but Norway, for example, talked about peace enabler. The beauty of the language. So what they are going to do. So it's a very difficult situation. So I don't think we should send peacekeeping at all. I mean, I think the only good thing that we should do is supporting the Ukrainians in this fight with weapon, and if necessary, for example, by providing air coverage, at least for Western Ukraine. I don't think a peacekeeping mission should be sent at all. This is my opinion, but I think we share also with Ireland and many other in Tochnyi and also around about this. And we can talk after why I think a peacekeeping mission is dangerous, but I leave to Colby.
Yeah, I would agree that I think conversations about peacekeepers are somewhat premature. I know that addressing the question, I know that the Australian government has said that they are open to this conversation, but I don't think it matters that much, and I think that it's premature. I think to be talking about peacekeepers when there is no peace to keep, as Danielle said. So I think it's all a bit of a red herring to be talking about which countries might be in such an endeavor when there's not really any conditions the conditions don't exist in which they could even go there. So
Who would have guessed Colby and Daniela both are agreeing with Scholz? Damn.
I disagree. I disagree with Scholz on many things, but we need to be fair with Macron and Starmer. They did this for a simple reason, trying to make a bridge with Trump. I think personally, and I don't know if you agree with me, Colby, but I think this was more a political. It's like the 12 Challenger. They will not change the world, but they will unlock something. Okay, so this is something that they did in order to show commitment. Okay, to try to debunk these things that Europe is gaining something, US is doing most of the effort. They tried to show goodwill. And also maybe show to Ukraine that, okay, we have you covered. But I think, practically speaking, Scholz said the correct things. It's not the time why we are discussing this. Just flood them with weapons. That should be the main discussion point. And also to just conclude this question is, peacekeeping mission in theory, and I say in theory, should be agreed with both parties. So, and we know that Lavrov, in many instances, say no, say no. We never accept that, and this is one of the reasons why I'm very angry with Trump, because in his way of doing this negotiation, which I think, I try to be more neutral on this, but he essentially accepted most of the point that Russia asked for, and so we don't have much leverage point. Okay, even if we were on the table, if you already say to your opponent, yeah, okay, everything is fine, then how you leverage something that you want to make happen? So I think this idea of the peacekeeping mission is going to die, because it's not going to be accepted by the other side. So, and potentially, in my opinion, all these negotiation will completely sink, because for different reasons, both parties don't want to settle to the condition that they need to accept to stop the killing, as President Trump say. I think the Russians want to carry on the war because they think they could win, but they want a pause to try to reorganize. On the other side, the Ukrainians, of course, do not want to cede any inch of their territory because it's unjust. And I agree with them, because in the moment you reward an aggression, we are doomed, because anyone will do the same. And Russia needs to be deterred, because they are building up their army, they are expanding their missile capability, and it's not for Ukraine. And if we allow them to even gain an inch here, we will pay 10 times, even 100 times more in a few years, maybe months.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Thank you, Daniela. Moving on to next question, and I think that's a question for Colby. At Tochnyi, with the withdrawal of US SIGINT flights of Rivet Joints and Poseidon flights on the Black Sea, and the heavy lift is being transferred to the UK and now France. Anyone able to comment on it? Was there a question?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the question is. It's a statement, but I know that, I mean, other countries have been doing their own ISR flights since the start of the war, as far as I understand it. It hasn't only been the United States, but obviously the United States has the greatest capacity in this area. They just have way more assets, more capable assets in most cases. But other countries are able to pick up the slack to some degree. Again, I think just overall, what we can say so far is that the withdrawal of U.S. intelligence cooperation is definitely going to have an impact. But again, Ukraine is more resilient now, both in its own capabilities and what other partners can potentially share with them. So it's definitely not any sort of doomsday scenario where Ukraine is just totally helpless without the United States sharing certain intelligence products. But certainly it's just another example of why it's important for Europe to step up more in its assistance for Ukraine, to fill any gap that's being left. But again, it's challenging in certain areas because Europe just doesn't have the same capabilities that the United States does in a lot of different domains.
Thank you very much, Colby. We have another question actually for you from Thierry. Are there alternative sources for HIMARS GMLRS missiles than US provided ones yet?
No, GMLRS is only produced in the United States. There's some conversation about establishing production in Poland at some point in the future, but that's, again, if that actually proceeds, it would still be a long time away, and it would not be a totally separate supply chain. It would just be final assembly of kits, basically. And I guess Australia actually as well is setting this up as well, but right now it's only the United States. So the only option is to buy those from the United States, and even then, I mean, GMLRS stocks are relatively critical. So even for the United States, there's a limit to what they can provide. It would be fairly hand to mouth with new production, essentially, because the bottom of the barrel is pretty close, I would say, in terms of the DoD's own stockpiles for GMLRS. So again, this is GMLRS is something that I think that a country like Germany really should have invested in at the start of the war. Germany could have localized GMLRS production by now if they had acted on that at the start. Like, it would have made a lot of sense for Germany to invest in GMARS and invest in localized production of GMLRS. But again, that's something that should have happened 3 years ago, and now, because it hasn't, there's not really a whole lot of point in trying to do that now at this stage. So yeah, Australia, maybe Poland, but these are still far away. So there's no alternative really. And there's no, even there's no other option for comparable systems either, really. I mean, what are the alternatives to GMLRS, to MOFAM in general? You have Israel, and Israeli weapons are not going to be provided to Ukraine. They're not going to sign off on any third-party transfer agreements. So that's not an option. Anybody who's buying missiles or launchers from Israel, that doesn't help Ukraine, or South Korea. And that doesn't help Ukraine either, because the South Koreans are not going to allow any of their missiles to be provided to Ukraine. So any country that is saying, oh, instead of buying HIMARS or MLRS family of munitions from the United States, we're going to buy from Israel, or we're going to buy from South Korea. I mean, you can do that, but if you're never going to be allowed to give those missiles to Ukraine. So if you're thinking that that's an option, it's not. And you're buying systems as well that are just, they're not combat proven as well. They're objectively inferior products. And so beyond that, I guess Turkey has some stuff as well, and those are definitely inferior products. So there's not a whole lot of alternatives here, and no alternatives really that are going to help Ukraine, because these are just not systems that will be allowed to be provided, because South Korea and Israel are not going to sign off on that.
I think the only option for that, if I understood correctly, is basically, and I think we also discussed this internally at Tochnyi, that to buy stuff from South Korea also for ourselves en masse, just like Poland did, for example, and deliver our old US-made stuff, which is already in service in Ukraine, to Ukraine as a replacement, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, how many countries have deep stocks of American systems at this point? I mean, across Europe, most of what could easily be sent has been sent already. So, maybe Poland, because they've got their own HIMARS. But again, it's about the munitions, and nobody is sitting on big stockpiles of GIMLRs, really. Besides the United States, there's a lot of GIMLR's customers who are going to have some modest or small stocks, or they haven't even received missiles yet because they have orders in the queue. So what they can do is that they can give those up if they're willing to. Whatever they get delivered to them, they can pass it on straight to Ukraine. But there's not a whole lot of good options here for GIMLRs.
So honestly, the only long-term or midterm alternative is really buying in the US from US stocks to have a midterm, long-term supply of new ammunition, possibly replacement systems or enhancement or capabilities enhancements later on, right?
Well, even for GIMLRs, I mean, the U.S. doesn't even have very substantial stocks of GIMLRs at this point in time. They've given quite a bit to Ukraine. I mean, they could part with more, but it's definitely GIMLRs is one of the categories of munitions that the United States is even is definitely short on. So it's hard for them, even if the United States was willing to just give them or to sell them. That's going to be a tricky one. To maintain a steady supply of GIMLRs. Basically, it's going to take a confluence of things. Basically, like all the customers for GIMLRs would need to give away their own deliveries that they're receiving, and as much as possible buying what the United States is willing to sell as well. That would probably keep a reasonable supply. But this is basically every possible thing that can be done will need to be done to keep GIMLRs flowing. Otherwise, there's definitely going to be a very limited or almost no supply of those forthcoming to Ukraine. GIMLRs, along with air defense, these are categories of munitions that are quite critical, and there's not very many easy ways to keep those supplied.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much. The next question from Marino, I think you answered it quite well with regard to HIMARS. This is linked to the F-16s. Does the current US politics influence the way how Ukraine can use the F-16s? And this is why why they got S-2000. I believe that's Mirage, right? Mirage 2000s. Do you want to add anything to that? I think you already said a lot of that regarding the HIMARS.
Yeah, the fundamental thing is that Ukraine is receiving grant assistance from the United States and other countries, and all of these countries have the ability to dictate to Ukraine, how they should use those systems. This was a problem for 3 years with the Biden administration not wanting Ukraine to use American weapons against Russia on Russian territory. So we're just seeing this evolve even further now. With the Mirages, yes, it's another option that they have now. And sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
No worries, man. You want to start over again, or do we just, because Marino already said, it's already answered or it's similar. So if you're lost track, it's fine, I guess. Do you have a timeout right now, or is Kobe just not answering? Daniela, do you hear me?
Sorry, I'm
Okay,
I'm here.
okay. Good. Yeah, when nobody else has any questions, anything to say, anything to add, I think we should end the stream, right? Good. I see no objections. So I hope that my moderating at the end was fine. Nobody's falling to sleep, and I hope that I did at least somehow a good job replacing Joseph at his unexpected being away, basically. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in. Really appreciate it that you take the time at a Sunday, actually at this late hours, to hear us ramble for 3 hours straight, or almost 3 hours now, about Ukraine. So thank you very, very much. Thanks also to our panel, of course, and especially to Brandon for being here after. I believe you said November was the last time you were here, right? So about 5 months. So thank you for that. And I don't think there's anything else to say. Go check out again our website, our social media channels, of course, also from our from the people on the panel. So from Colby, Daniela, but also from Joseph, although he's not here, so he should be punished. Don't check out his account, but do from Brendan, and of course also from mine. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.
On behalf of the brave.